Morning, everyone. Well, we heard about money, and we're here to chat a bit. Good, diverse group, our panelists, different perspectives, all involved in infrastructure delivery here in the Rocky Mountains. And we're going to talk about how these communities or utilities deliver their projects and how they use those funds. And a little bit more granular. So if you will, I'm Mark Alpert. Again, I am the executive director of an association called the Water Collaborative Delivery Association, which is made up of every major engineering, construction, technology, and system integrator company working in the water sector globally. I retired actively as a practitioner in 2014. And since that time, I've been associated with this organization and sitting on the owner side advising owners. And I hadn't really done that in my entire career. I've worked in all 50 states and every Canadian province on projects, so I have a diverse set of experience. But I think you're going to find our panel very interesting. So I'm going to start off with Brian. And tell us a little bit about yourself, Brian, and how Fort Collins does their work.
Good morning.
Is that on?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, good.
Good morning. I'm Brian Herget. I'm the Assistant Operations Services Director for the City of Fort Collins. We're about 60 miles north of Denver here. Population about 170,000 people. Home of about 25 breweries. But my job as the Assistant Operations Services Director is to help manage 4 different departments in-house. We have our capital projects, which is new construction, major renovations for buildings. We have facility maintenance. The city has roughly 100 different facilities and buildings that we have to continue to maintain on a regular basis. We have real estate, so we have all of our real estate transactions, buying land, selling land, leases, all those types of things, easements for projects. And then we have fleet. We maintain roughly 2,500 vehicles and pieces of equipment across the city. We have 4 different mechanic shops that help maintain those. One is strictly for our transport buses, and all the rest are for all the different facility fleet maintenance.
Thank you, Brian. Okay. My friend from Denver Water. And if there was a mention of water infrastructure, let him talk about Denver Water and who you are and what you do.
My name is Ryan Stitt. I am the planning manager for our water rights group. I'm also a water resources engineer. Part of my role is working with our development of downstream reservoirs, which means that they're north of Denver. They're the reclamation of gravel and sand mines for water storage purposes. Denver Water is the 3rd largest landowner in the state. We serve 1.5 million people around the Denver metro area. We have infrastructure in the Colorado River Basin as well as the South Platte River Basin, so we deal a lot with political issues across the divide, we'll say. So from an infrastructure perspective, we have a very large capital plan, which we set out, I think, 25 years. And so that really helps in the planning of projects and allows us to prepare and budget appropriately for the large amount of infrastructure that we have.
Thank you. Patrick?
Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Riley. I'm the construction manager for the City and County of Denver's Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Transportation Implementation Division, which is a lot of words. So I've been at the city for about 11 years now. I've been fortunate enough to work on some of the largest programs in the city, be it the Brighton Boulevard redevelopment, the National Western Center, which I spent 4 years on, and I've recently rolled into my role working primarily in the transportation sector. yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk about alternative deliveries.
Good, good. Okay, Andy. Andy made a long haul here from the beautiful city of Aspen.
So you've heard from the large guys. We're Aspen. We're about 10,000 customers. We have 7,100 combined water and electric meters. I'm the capital project manager for all things water and electric. We are the story of mountain communities when it comes to deferred maintenance. So our electric system was installed direct bury in 1976 and 1986, respectively. And much like myself, it's starting to show its age. So we are in a 15-year capital program to replace the entirety of our underground electric direct bury system. We have the intent to spend about $2 to $3 million a year. So whereas you hear other people spending massive amounts of money, we're spending smaller amounts of money, but we're doing it as nimbly as possible and working with the local development community to get the best product available. On the water side, we have about 25 and a half miles of cast iron and stainless steel, not stainless, but steel lines that are also beginning to show their age. So we're engaged in a large infrastructure, $4 to $7 million a year in capital replacement on those systems. And then we're also looking at upgrading our water plant. Again, we're just a clean water and electrical utility, but we do a lot of work.
Thanks, Andy. Just something to tee up how these organizations deliver their work. I'm trained as a civil environmental engineer. When I started my career in the 1970s, engineers didn't talk to construction firms didn't talk to engineering firms, and technology firms didn't talk to anyone. They just delivered products. And to our first intro speaker, who had a nice set of products, I looked at them on his website, nobody worked together. And I think the beauty of my association, which is relevant to the topic here this morning, is how to better and more efficiently deliver capital projects. And you heard a lot about money, you heard a lot about these organizations. Each one have different types of infrastructure needs. But the bottom line is the industry has changed and owners have changed, and all realize the engineer, contractor or construction firm, technology firm need to work together. And that's hence the utilization of the term collaborative project delivery. They have to collaborate. And I must say that was foreign to my original training. And I think you'll find the comments here from our panel very interesting. So I want to go back to you, Brian. How does your organization deliver the work, procure and deliver? What's the best delivery method that you're using, and why?
Well, I've been with the city of Fort Collins now 11 years, and when I came to the city, about 75% of the work was contracted through the hard bid scenario, where you design, bid, build, and working through that. And since then, so the 11 years, we've turned that basically on its head. We now do about 75 to 80% of our work is negotiated, either CMAR, CMGC, or design build, and we do about 20%, somewhere in that realm, of a hard bid. And we try to designate which projects maybe fit into that hard bid world, but it's very few. I mean, most of our projects we try to really bring in, create a partnership with the design firms, the contractors, and sometimes when we do the design build, we put those two together. You know, we have the contractor actually hold the contract with the design firm, and we do that on the ones that we really have a very tight budget and a very tight scenario of scope of what we need to try to do. But tying those two together with a contract and amongst themselves, that contractor really hold that design firm accountable and making sure they're not designing something that they can't build for the budget they provided us. Now the CMAR or the CMGC is the next best thing, where we bring in a design firm, get them on board, and then we bring in the contractor to work as a construction manager up front and working with that. And we basically tell them that you're connected to the hip. You know, you're not directly working for each other, but you're connected to the hip, and you're supposed to be communicating on a daily basis to make sure that you're delivering or you're designing a project that contractor still feels that he can deliver He's been providing the constructability of that project. All that information is going into that design, so when we go forward, we have a project we feel that we can really deliver on the budget that we have, that we're not coming back after the fact and trying to go back to our city council or our taxpayers and trying to find some additional money. And it has really been a big beneficial in the 11 years I've been there to deliver projects that we really feel we can do. And
Thank you. Ryan, Denver Water utilizes these delivery methods very actively.
We do, and a lot like Fort Collins, it sounds like it's really been over about the last 10 years where we've really started to employ them. I think my perspective is that we have moved from the design bid build process dependent on the risk of the facility, the number of different disciplines that are involved in a project, and then what our in-house expertise provides to us. So from a budgetary standpoint, that falls into risk and the criticality of the infrastructure, whether it's necessary for supplying a customer treated water versus whether it's something we would use for a water rights process like a downstream reservoir where we're releasing a water to make an exchange upstream to our infrastructure. Those have different levels of how do I say it? They don't affect the customer as immediately, so we take a little bit more risk on those types of projects.
Okay, thank you. Patrick?
At the city, we've really taken more of the toolbox approach, and we have on-calls that we compete both on large and small businesses that create selected pools for us to use. When the projects kind of fall within that approach, we still do design bid build. We have design bid contracts, or design build contracts, I'm sorry. We have CMGC, CMIRs. We have integrated construction contracts. We've really taken approach to try to be innovative on the front end on our procurements to give ourselves the most diverse toolbox that we can have to match the risk profiles and the challenges of any given project and give ourselves the best chance of a successful outcome. So we have, the ability to negotiate bids at times. We have the ability to do defined pools and really match the contractors that we're working with to the project and their specialties.
Okay. Andy?
Yeah, so at the City of Aspen, we typically take the design bid build methodology. We don't really have the nimble ability to do multi-year contracts. Our procurement department doesn't like multi-year, and anybody in the utility space understands that all of our projects are multi-year projects. So we've taken the approach of designing in 1 year, really soliciting a lot of feedback from the development community and from the contracting community, and taking the opportunity to learn from the design build experts and deliver projects effectively in that fashion. We have started engaging in some CMAR, but it's not really been super effective for us. We found that trust is so critical in these relationships, and because of the history of our valley, there tends to be more of competitiveness. We're fighting the municipality, we're fighting the design engineers, rather than this collaborative approach. So with my 14 years at the City of Aspen, I've really tried to cast a broad net and ensure that everybody is involved at every step in the project. When the contracting community is aware that I have $2 million of projects coming out every year, they can get that on their books in December. They can know that they're locked into our contracts for the subsequent year. And that really helps them manage some of that risk. Now, there's always risk out there inherent in construction projects, but we're doing our best to manage that without having the contracting ability that some of the larger organizations have. And we're really working towards that trust now.
Well, you bring up a good point, trust. I mentioned earlier back, again, my original training, we didn't really trust those contractors. They were black hats. All they wanted to do was make a big profit at the owner's expense. And we, the engineer, were really beholden to those contractors who wanted to make claims against us or say our design wasn't complete. Now that's changed. And one of the things I'm curious about with our group is, how do you build trust? How do you build trust between a municipal organization and the private sector, who are the delivery entities for your work generally? I don't know if any of you want to raise your hand or start off, or Andy, do you want to?
Oh, I was going to say, take me to dinner $35 at a time. Has to be under that $35 threshold. No, I think that, I mean, trust is built over successful projects. So you know who the quality contractors are. You know who the quality engineers are. We see the fly-by-nights in Aspen. We see a company, and we tend to chase individuals in the valley. I know who can put pipe together well, and I know which company they're at currently. And because of that relationship, we're a 60,000 person valley. It probably isn't going to work in Fort Collins or Denver, but that personal relationship really does go a long way.
Okay.
I think, in my experience, one of the best ways to build trust is to take a program or project first approach, starting with your contractor, starting with your designer from the beginning. Of the name on your truck doesn't matter, the name on your business card doesn't matter. We have to operate within the same principles of the project and what is the best for the project. And selfishly for us as the city, what's the best for my taxpayers? What's the best for our constituents, the people that are paying for this? So matching those delivery methodologies, especially when you're dealing with alternative deliveries where you're making best value selections, and you can weigh in the personnel or the experience of the firm, and you can weigh in their approach. You can ask those questions up front, kind of sets the table, but really bringing them in and having very clear, concise communication of, we're going to operate within these parameters for the course of this project. We're going to operate with these as our values, and let them be collaborative into that. But I think especially as we get into some of the more complex, like an integrated construction contract where it's a little more fuzzy on the edges, like having that team first, project first, program first approach is the only way you can build that trust.
Thank you. Okay.
I really like what Patrick said about the project mentality and putting the project first as a team. And I think that really does happen during the bidding process or during the selection process, when everybody's able to get on the same page as to what the project requires, what the expected outcome is, and just having those open dialogues throughout the process. I think the other portion of that teamwork is understanding and being accountable for the mistakes that each individual makes or each entity makes along the way. Should we, as the funder, the person asking for the project to be done, did we have all of the materials and the scope of work, or is it a change? Is it a reasonable thing to pay extra because we didn't account for that? On the construction side, did you have the opportunity to see that potential cost? Should you bear it if it was something that you had knowledge of and just didn't account for it in your bid? I think as entities take responsibility and really own up to their portion of the project, it really starts to build that trust. And when you see companies do that, you're more apt to split the bill, in my opinion.
Okay. Ryan,
Yeah.
how is Fort Collins engaged with their community of delivery firms and build trust?
Well, it's something that's built over time. I mean, like I say, we kind of flipped it on its head over the 10-year period, but it doesn't happen overnight. And so often there's contractors out there that were one day doing it as a hard bid world, and the next day they're trying to dive into this negotiated CMGC world, and they still try to do it the same way, and it's not meant to be the same way. We have had some bad experiences through this process where we've had contractors that we awarded them to as a CMGC, and we get into the construction, and then it's like everything that's coming out is as a change order. And it's like, wait a minute, we talked about all this during the whole design process. And I look at it, I came from the construction world. I was on the private side for 26 years. And my boss used to tell me, if you're in a meeting during a design process, and if there's something said that owner wants, and if it doesn't get put on the drawings, that's your fault. It doesn't mean we're not going to do it. We're still going to do it because it was discussed in the meeting. It's your job to make sure it gets put on the drawing so everybody bids it correctly. And that's a philosophy I really feel. It's a partnership. We're all working together. It's not go into it and it's construction and now it's a whole, you all seen those pictures where you have this little boat that is the original contract, and then you get this big yacht sitting next to it, which is a change order. And there's some contractors that still feel that that's the nature of the business and trying to get this big windfall and have this big success and huge amounts of money coming their way. And That's not, and the idea of a negotiated is we have a very detailed RFP that we put together for our contractors, and it spells out exactly the whole matrix of how their costs are supposed to be written down, what's in general conditions, what's in general requirements, what's part of the fee, and they're supposed to look at that. And if there's anything that they feel is wrong about that breakout, they need to bring it to our attention, because that's how we look at it, and that's where all their dollars need to be broke out. And so we look at it that basically, when they give us a number in their proposal, it has everything except for the actual hard construction cost. There's nothing there that we shouldn't know about. And so then it's really, you have a fee, you have the general conditions, you know what they're gonna charge you for that duration of the project. All you're waiting for now is to determine what that hard construction cost is. And once you have that, you really have a very transparent process through the whole thing. And it makes it, that's how you build trust, being transparent and showing you where you're at. And, you know, and if you have issues that come up, you talk about them and you work through them.
I really like what both of these guys had to say about failure. So 14 years ago when I started at the city of Aspen, I was terrified of failure. I'm going to be out on the street. I'm going to be fired. But through my career, I've learned that there's one way to fail, and that's failing forward. So as long as you're moving forward through that failure and you've learned something from it, we've all learned from our failures. Shoot, I have been so much more successful because of my failures than my successes. I don't remember my successes, but I can tell you some of the horror stories.
You know, I've trained about 120 utilities throughout the U.S. in these delivery methods. And I always ask the question up front. And I would ask this group, how many of you, if you're in the project business, have ever had a perfect project? Anyone in the room? Perfect project, and Andy was referring to it just brought up a vignette early in my career when I had just gotten my license, my engineering license, and I thought I was a big deal. And our firm I was working for, which was a major engineering firm at the time, designed a two-story structure. It had above grade and below grade, and here we're talking about IAJA funds. And when the bids came in, this was delivered, design bid build, it was about 8% above budget. And the funding agency said, we got to go back and rebid. So what did we do? We broke the project into two contracts, one subgrade and one above grade. Bid the work, came in within the budget for the two projects, as it turned out the second time around. The above grade structure failed, and it was a large concrete box for a filtration facility, a very large facility in Washington, D.C. 400-foot section of wall collapsed. It was, fortunately, no one was injured, but it was a result of a design error by our firm. And I remember the president of the company, this was a very important client, I'm not sure this happens today, came down, looked at the project. We retained a forensic structural engineer, determined what happened, determined it was our fault. We paid 100 cents on a dollar to fix the project. Now, in today's world, this is why collaborative delivery occurred and why these owners are now looking at different ways to deliver projects, because I don't know how many of you are attorneys here in this room. I have many attorneys in my family, but I am not an attorney. But the litigious nature of delivering infrastructure in the United States has driven part of the use of these delivery methods, where the goal, which the panel has talked about, best for project. Patrick mentioned that, and I think that is important. But in the same breath, with these delivery methods, there's risk transfer. And I'd like to hear the panelists talk a little bit about what they think is the best way to allocate risk. What's the owner responsibility and what's the delivery firm or firm's responsibility? And I don't know who wants to start first. Ryan, you want to start first, please?
Sure. I guess in an ideal world, I would have no risk. but risk comes at a cost. And so when it comes down to how we're going to manage risk, I think that, again, it's going to be infrastructure dependent for us, but to the extent that we feel that that infrastructure is critical to the job that we do day in and day out, supplying water to our customers, we're going to take on more risk for that. We're going to do that work more likely with in-house design and do a hard design bid build type process. As that risk begins to go down, we will start to look at these alternative transfer methods because that's a water rights term, alternative contracting methods, and begin to evaluate how fast do we need the project. If it's something that's a fast turnaround, we'll push that risk to somebody else, like in a design build process, so that they can find ways to do the project faster than we would otherwise be able to do it. So again, it's going to be infrastructure dependent for us, but to the extent we can, we try to own the risk so that we have the final product that we really want.
But by the way, before I go to the other panelists, Ryan's role, if you looked at his title, water rights, I'd urge you to have a chance to chat with them outside because Colorado has some of the most unique, just like California, conventions that came along when we became a state with water rights. And it's not so easy to move water from ag to municipal and industrial use. And I suspect he knows a little bit about the topic. It's a very complex topic here in Colorado. But let's go back to the risk transfer. Patrick, you and I talked about a few projects here in the city and risk transfer.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important parts of that is being truthful with yourself. Like, what are my actual risks? We all have those standardized risk registers that say, okay, we could have cost inflation. We could have, the standard pieces that are there. One of the ones that always, I think, gets missed is the concept of reputational risk. So for us as the city, a construction project might impact access to a business. That's not going to get viewed by that business owner as this contractor is doing this to me. This is about the city is doing this to me. And I think when you're selecting your methodologies, if you can be real with yourself and be truthful with yourself on what your risks are, like what the outside things, like every project has the potential of unforeseen conditions. We're going to dig in the ground, we're going to find something we weren't anticipating. And some projects have that more than others because of historical land uses. But noticing those reputational risks, noticing kind of these ancillary second tier ones, and selecting your methodology accordingly. I am a big proponent of CMGCs. I like the idea of sharing risk. I want to share the risk, I want to share the reward. I think it sets you up for projects on a more realistic basis. Like, it does not fit for everyone, but it puts you in a place where you're sharing the risk with the contractor from the beginning, and we're not at odds before we've ever put a shovel in the ground. So you can work from that point. The reality is a good project, to me, looks like my contractor made the money he was trying to make. I want him to be successful. I want him to be profitable. I want my designer to be successful and profitable. I want the businesses on the corridors we're working on to continue to be successful and profitable. That's what a good project is. If all of those components come together, we probably had a pretty good project, right? And when you start at odds with people in a design bid build, that's inherently what you're doing. You're starting kind of butting heads from the beginning. I think that doesn't set you up for success as much. It doesn't mean you can't be successful there, but it needs to be used in the projects that have a little bit more constrained risk registers.
I like this concept of reputational risk. I really like that a lot. We're fortunate right now to be working with a company that it was founded 62 years ago in the Aspen Valley, and they have a name to uphold. The city of Aspen may or may not have some clout associated with it, having been established in 1895, and apparently we have a ski resort. So when you start looking at these things, I need to be out there on a daily basis as the city of Aspen, or else these multimillionaires or multi-billionaires have the potential to buy the entire city. I know that sounds crazy, but they have that much money, they have that many lawyers. And if we're not out there putting ourselves on the line, in cahoots with the contractor, we're behind the 8 ball when we start. And there's been issues with customers and residents and the city of Aspen? How do you plus that customer? How do you go back to that public servant mindset that so many people have moved beyond? Well, I'm a government employee. Nah, you're a public servant. So how do you best serve the public? So I love this idea of reputational risk.
And I'd just like to say that, you know, in the design bid build world, there is a lot of risk that the owner takes on, because you have to take the risk of, did my design firm put everything in those drawings and those documents that I need to make sure I'm getting a good competitive bid? I'm taking the risk of whether that contractor saw everything and whether there's some note on there that he interpreted it wrong, and trying to look at how he put together his number. And you come to basically award that hard bid contractor somebody you really don't know that well, and you're hoping or assuming that he's going to give you the project you need, or the negotiator, the CMAR, the CMGC. You come together early on. So often in our bigger projects, we put together a partnering session where we bring all the design firm and the contractors in, and we do a little partnering session where we actually go through some exercises, and it kind of helps us get to know each other and try to understand what the goals and for that project is, so we can all be working together. And that helps reduce the risk, because then they understand where you are and they want to be a partner and they want to give you that end result. And like Patrick said, at the end, we want the contractor to make money. We're not here to try to cause them to go broke or close the doors. That's not our goal. But again, I always say I want to give you I'm hard, but I'm fair. I want to give you the potential to make the money that you're after, but don't come after me and try to make it a windfall for you.
So just quickly, we've used some terminology, and I should have addressed this up front. CMGC, construction manager / general contractor, or CMAR, construction manager risk. Two separate contracts, an engineer and a construction firm. But the way those projects are successful, and the panel has validated that, is when the parties work together for best of project and function as if they are a single team. Design build is different. Design build is where there's a single entity, regardless of a team structure, that's responsible for design, integrated design and construction of a project. And they're very different. I think it's important to understand that that's what we're talking about. We're not really focused in this panel. Others may today talk about P3. We have about 6 minutes left. And one thing that, we talked about all this money flowing. And one of the things that is so important, and I'd like each of the panelists spend a minute talking about this, is cost and transparency. Now, you've got a budget that's approved for your capital projects. So how do you work that? Because in the public bidding arena, it's a public opening at 2 o'clock on Thursday, and you can go and see contractor A, B, and C bid, and contractor B was the lowest responsible bidder, assuming all their documents are good, their price. This is a different model, these delivery methods. So I don't know who wants to start off. I don't know, Brian, do you want to talk about this? Cost and transparency is so vital to utilizing these delivery methods that can result in more efficient and cost-effective projects.
It's certainly a more rigorous process, but the idea is with the CMAR and CMGC that you mentioned, it's really sitting down with that contractor and going through with his bid tabs. He may have, 6, 7 different bidders in each different category, going through and reviewing them, and hopefully he came ahead of time and kind of got them, so he thinks comparing them apples to apples, what he thinks and what his recommendation is for who he would like to use. But it's going through those and looking at every line item in his estimate of what he has as his cost, and trying to understand what those true costs are and weigh in on them. Sometimes they may have something missing and he has to pick up 1 or 2 items here in that specific trade to make sure that it is compared apples to apples, or make sure he's got the complete package, and just talking through that so you understand what those true costs are. Then when he submits his pay application, he has a complete schedule of values that breaks down every one of those single costs And it's rigorous. It takes a lot of time. Sometimes our pay applications we get from contractors are 200 pages, and trying to go through a lot. I either tell them either I want the details up front, every pay app, so I can see everything, or I'm going to do a full audit at the end. Well, however would you rather see it? And typically, they would prefer to do it on a month-to-month basis so that they work through it, and then they can put that behind them rather than trying to wait till the end, and then you do a complete full audit of, 10,000 pages, and it takes you 2 months to do the audit, and he wants to get paid. So we feel it's a lot better trying to do it on a month-by-month basis and really dive into where those true costs are and being transparent. And if we have questions, we go back and we review it and we dive into it. And
Thank you. Thanks. Brian.
I guess the way I see these alternative methods working is that it allows for not really looking at the low price bid anymore, but more looking at the quality of the bid and the ability for the owner to say, this is generally what we want. You as the design and construction firms, tell us how you can deliver it. Tell us the best way to go about it. And it really allows for a lot more perspective into what that project becomes. And I think in a lot of ways that creates a better final project than what could be envisioned as part of a design bid build. But as part of that, it creates this need to justify potentially selecting a higher cost proposal. And then to make sure that that proposal was accepted in the right way. I think it's just important that you have these milestones where you have check-ins to make sure that the project is proceeding and that you are getting what you need in the end.
I'd change that terminology from higher cost to higher value.
So before the last two, you were referring to best value procurement, the balance of the qualifications of the delivery firm, the skills of the project people who are going to work on the project, particularly perhaps their approach to solving the owner's project needs, balanced against what's the price. So that's what we're talking about. So Patrick?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things you can do in an uncertain world, which we're dealing with right now with inflation and material supply chains and just still kind of coming out of COVID, if we're being honest with ourselves, I was always taught the 5 Ps, proper preparation prevents poor performance. Being ahead of it, being proactive, going to the street with adults and options, plan on the inevitable failures that are going to happen, and don't be reactive, waiting on that bid to come in 8%, 10% high, and then start questioning what you're going to do. You need to be ahead of that and start saying, okay, my scope, my real true scope that we have to accomplish this is X. All these other things are ancillary, and start to piece it out in advance. Spending that time on the front end will make those value conversations easier. They'll give you options that you can flesh out further. Once you have a best value contractor selected, they'll give you options. When you're behind the 8 ball, when the bids are sitting there and you're going through bid tabs and you're just high, that's not the time where you figure out how you're going to mitigate those cost overruns.
I'm envious of this 8 to 10% low. If you look at the Vail Daily last week, there's an excellent article on construction projects with Eagle River Water and Sand where they're 100% low. And that's become kind of the standard in some of the mountain communities. So it's interesting when people are 8 to 10% off. Going back to the topic at hand, I think that GMP, guaranteed maximum pricing, as well as open bookkeeping, may save us all if you have the time to go through their books and go through. And I think that's where Brian was getting at, is the true open bookkeeping and the audit at the end of the project. It'll save you all if you have the time to do it. And it takes time. So that's one thing that a lot of people don't put in, is the rectifying the books after the fact.
Great. Well, this is an interesting panel. We could spend the whole day ourselves, but there's a lot of topics today, and I encourage all of you to stay around. And we'll be out in the foyer. And thank you again for paying attention. And no one fell asleep, so I figure we scored well. Thank you very much.